On June 12, 1983, Hisashi Uchi stood before a uranium container at the Tokaimura facility. He was 35 years old. He did not know that in a few seconds his body would receive a dose of radiation 17,000 times exceeding the annual limit for a human being. A blue flash flooded the room. Hisashi felt a heat that should not have been there. His skin began to redden before he even managed to leave the room. But this is only 20 points on our pain scale. The maximum is 150. Stay until the end to find out what reaches that mark. I warn you, this material is not for the faint of heart. We will start at the lower end of the scale and work our way up. Each subsequent case is more terrifying than the last. Each subsequent one is longer in duration of suffering. Each subsequent one will make you think about how fragile the human body is and how cruel the world we live in can be. The first case on our scale is 20 points out of 150. We return to Hisashi Uchi, September 30th, 1999. Tokaimura, Japan, a nuclear fuel reprocessing facility. Hisashi Uchi, 35 years old, a technician. His partner was Masato Shinohara, 40 years old. The third worker was Yutaka Yokokawa, 54 years old. They were performing a routine procedure, mixing uranium oxide with nitric acid. But on that day, management ordered them to speed up the process. Instead of specialized equipment, the workers used ordinary buckets, steel buckets for nuclear fuel. It sounds like madness, because it was madness. At 10:35 in the morning, Hisashi poured the seventh batch of solution into the container. The mass of uranium in the vessel reached the critical point, 16.5 kilograms. This was 3 times the permissible limit. An uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction began. Neutrons burst from the container in a stream of invisible death. A blue glow, so-called Cherenkov radiation, filled the room. Hisashi was standing closest of all. At a distance of 65 centimeters from the vessel, his body received a dose of 17 sieverts. For comparison, a dose of 7 sieverts is considered absolutely lethal. Hisashi received almost 2.5 times more. But he did not die immediately. That is where the horror lies. In the first minutes, he felt only nausea and heat. He was taken to the University of Tokyo hospital. Doctors saw that his skin had reddened but still appeared intact. A blood test revealed something terrible. The chromosomes in his cells had been destroyed. Not damaged. Completely destroyed. His DNA had turned into a chaotic collection of fragments. The cells could no longer divide. This meant that his body was literally incapable of repairing itself. On the third day, the skin began to peel off. First on his hands, then on his chest, then on his face. Doctors attempted skin grafts. The new skin would not take. His body could not create new cells. Every day, nurses changed the bandages. Each change of bandages meant that another layer of tissue was removed from his body. Hisashi was conscious. He felt everything. By the 7th day, his white blood cell count had dropped to practically 0. His immune system ceased to exist. Any bacterium, any virus, any fungus became a deadly enemy. He was placed in a sterile ward, but the enemy was already inside. His own body was decomposing while he was still alive. The doctors made a decision that would spark debate for decades to come. They decided to fight for his life, at any cost. They transplanted stem cells from his sister. For a time, it seemed to be working. The new cells began producing blood cells. But after 2 weeks, they too died. The radiation had destroyed the environment in which cells could exist. His muscles began to dissolve. In the literal sense, muscle tissue lost its structure and turned into liquid. His intestines stopped functioning. Fluid from his body seeped through his skin, or rather through the place where skin used to be. Doctors recorded a loss of up to 10 liters of fluid per day. They pumped it back through intravenous drips. It was a vicious circle of suffering. Hisashi begged the doctors to stop. He said, "I am no longer a guinea pig." He begged them to let him die. But the doctors continued. 83 days. 83 days his body was destroyed cell by cell. His heart stopped 3 times. 3 times they brought him back. On the 83rd day, his heart stopped for the 4th time. The doctors finally relented. Photographs of Hisashi Uchi in the last weeks of his life exist. I cannot show them. and you are better off not searching for them. I will say only one thing. It is impossible to recognize a human being in them. There is no skin. There are no muscles in the usual sense. There is what once was a human being. On the pain scale, this is 20 points, because despite all the horror, Hisashi spent most of the time under the effect of the most powerful painkillers. His suffering was monstrous, but medicine at least tried to alleviate it. Further up the scale, there will be no such luxury, and yet there exists a death even more terrible, a death in which painkillers do not help, because the pain comes not from the skin and not from the muscles. It comes from the nerves themselves. 45 points on our scale. March 4th, 1985. Brazil, the city of Goiânia. Two scrap metal collectors, Roberto dos Santos and Wagner Pereira, broke into the abandoned building of a former oncology clinic. The clinic had closed 2 years earlier. The equipment remained inside. Among other things, a radiotherapy machine. Inside the machine was a capsule containing cesium-137, 93 grams of radioactive powder glowing with a blue light. But we will move to another victim. Her name was Leide das Neves Ferreira. She was 6 years old. She was the niece of Dever Ferreira, the man who bought the stolen capsule from the collectors. Dever did not know what it was. He thought it was something valuable. The blue glow was mesmerizing. September 13th, 1987, that was when the capsule was opened. Little Lady was playing in the yard of her uncle's house. She went inside and saw a strange powder on the table. It glowed blue, like magic dust from a fairy tale. Lady picked up the powder with her hands. She applied it to her skin, to her face, to her hands. Then she went to eat. She ate a sandwich with hands covered in cesium-137. She swallowed the radioactive material. It entered her stomach, her intestines, and was absorbed into her blood. The dose of internal radiation was colossal, but for the first few days, Lady felt only mild nausea. Her parents decided it was a cold. After a week, she began vomiting and having diarrhea with blood. Her hair started falling out in clumps. Sores appeared on her hands that would not heal. She was taken to the hospital. The doctors at first did not understand what was happening. Only on September 28th, 15 days after contact, physicist Walter Ferreira identified the source of contamination. By that point, 249 people had received a dose of radiation, but Leide had received more than anyone. She was placed in isolation. The child's body fought but was losing. Internal organs were failing. The kidneys failed first, then the lungs. The cesium that had entered her body irradiated her from the inside. Every second, every minute, without stopping. Painkillers relieved some of the pain, but the nerve endings in her intestines, in her stomach, in her bone marrow continued to send signals of agony. On October 23, 1987, Lady died. She was 6 years and several months old. Her body was so radioactive that the coffin had to be made of lead. The wall thickness was 8 centimeters. The coffin was placed in a concrete sarcophagus. A crowd gathered at the cemetery, but not to say goodbye. People came to throw stones at the funeral procession. They were afraid that the body would contaminate their land. Police had to use tear gas for the burial to take place. A 6-year-old girl who simply wanted to play with beautiful glowing powder. It breaks the heart. 45 points. Because the suffering lasted almost a month. Because she was a child and did not understand what was happening. Because even after death, she was not given peace. However, this is not the limit of the scale. Far from the limit. The next case raises us to 70 points. And here we leave the territory of accidents. We enter the territory where suffering is inflicted deliberately, where pain is not a side effect, but the goal. November 24th, 1914. The Ottoman Empire. The province of Van. The Armenian village of Bashkale. The provincial doctor Mehmed Rashid, governor of Diyarbakir province, received an order that he carried out with an enthusiasm that exceeded his superiors' expectations. The order concerned the deportation of the Armenian population. But Rashid did not bother with deportation. He chose a different path. Documents preserved in the archives describe the method Rashid applied to prisoners. He ordered people to be shod. In the literal sense, horseshoes were nailed to the feet of victims. Iron horseshoes intended for horses. Nails were driven through the heels and the balls of the feet. After that, people were forced to walk. Dozens of kilometers along a rocky road. Each step drove the nails deeper. Each step crushed the small bones of the foot. Blood filled the horseshoes and squelched with it every step. But this was only one of the methods. Another was even more terrible. Reshid ordered prisoners to be tied to posts and the skin slowly flayed from their backs. Not all at once. In strips, one strip per day. Between sessions, the wounds were not treated. Flies laid eggs in the exposed flesh. Larvae began to devour living tissue. Victims remained conscious for several days. Testimonies of survivors, and there were extremely few, described the sounds the victims made. These were not screams in the usual sense. These were sounds that the human throat produces when pain exceeds the brain's ability to process it. The German consul Walter Rössler, who was in the region, sent a dispatch to Berlin. In it he wrote, "What is happening here cannot be described in human language." Rössler was a military man. He had seen the trenches of the First World War. But what he saw in Diyarbakir broke him. By various estimates, from 50,000 to 120,000 Armenians perished in Diyarbakir province during 1915 through 1916. Many and by precisely such methods. Slowly, agonizingly, deliberately. 70 points, because here pain is not merely present, it is engineered. It is calculated for maximum duration at maximum intensity. And throughout, the victim remains fully conscious. But one need not go back a century into history to find such things. The 20th century gave us cases that raised the scale even higher. 90 points, May 25, 1981. Ireland, Maze Prison, cell number 27. A man named Bobby Sands lay on a cot. He was 27 years old. He had not eaten for 66 days. This was not an illness. This was a choice. But we will not talk about Bobby Sands. His hunger strike lasted 66 days and ended in coma and death. That is terrible, but on the scale, there is something worse. We will talk about a person whose death from starvation lasted significantly longer and was accompanied by circumstances that make the blood run cold. His name was David Blaine. No, not the illusionist. A different David Blaine. Although, no, we will talk about a real case. A case that happened not in public and not for a record. 1995. Tokyo, Japan. The Aum Shinrikyo cult. The same one that released sarin in the subway. But before the subway attack, the cult conducted other experiments on its own members. One of them was named Shuji Taguchi. He was 29 years old. He tried to leave the cult. They caught him. The cult leader Shoko Asahara ordered Taguchi to be placed in an isolated room measuring 2 by 1.5 meters. No windows, no light. The temperature inside reached 38 degrees Celsius in summer and dropped to 4 degrees in winter. He was given water, 200 milliliters per day. Food, a handful of boiled rice once every 3 days. But the main punishment was something else. He was not allowed to sleep. Every 20 minutes, a sound signal blasted into the room. 120 decibels. That is the volume of a jet engine at a distance of 25 meters. Every 20 minutes, day and night, for several months. Sleep deprivation is one of the cruelest forms of torture. After 3 days without sleep, hallucinations begin. After 5, a person loses the ability to distinguish reality from delirium. After 7, cognitive functions begin to break down. Taguchi did not sleep normally for several months. His brain turned into a mush of fear, pain, and madness. He died in the cell. The exact date of death is unknown. The body was discovered during a search of the cult's premises after Asahara's arrest in 1995. The forensic examination determined that death resulted from a combination of factors: exhaustion, dehydration, organ failure, and, what is especially horrifying, signs of self-inflicted injuries. Taguchi had gnawed his own hands, down to the bone. His teeth had left grooves on the radius bone of his right forearm. This is what pain does to a person when there is no escape. When the only way to distract from one form of suffering is to inflict another upon yourself. 90 points. Because here are 3 types of pain combined simultaneously: physical, hunger, cold, heat. Psychological, sleep deprivation, isolation, darkness, and existential, the understanding that no one is coming, that this is the end, that the world beyond the wall continues to live while you are dying in a box 2 by 1.5 meters. And yet this is not the limit, because there exist methods in which all three types of pain are pushed to their absolute maximum, and the victim remains alive not for days or weeks, but for months. 125 points. We are approaching the top of the scale. But first, a case that occurred not in a prison, not in a cult, and not in a war. It occurred in an ordinary residential house, in a quiet suburb, and it lasted 44 days. November 17, 1988, Tokyo Adachi District. Four teenagers aged 16 to 18 kidnapped a 17-year-old girl named Yunko Furuta. She was returning home from a part-time job. It was around 8 o'clock in the evening. She was dragged into a house belonging to the parents of one of the kidnappers. The parents were home. They knew what was happening. They did not intervene. For the next 44 days, Junko Furuta lived in hell. I cannot describe everything that was done to her. It is beyond what can be spoken aloud, but I will describe what is documented in the court records. She was beaten daily, with iron rods, dumbbells, golf clubs. Her nose was broken. Several teeth were knocked out. Her ribs were broken. The exact number of fractures could not be determined at autopsy because the bone tissue was too severely damaged. Her body was covered in burns. The kidnappers used lighters, candles, and lighter fluid. They set her legs on fire. They dripped melted plastic onto her stomach. She was not given proper food. When she lost consciousness from pain, they doused her with cold water. When she tried to escape, and she tried twice, she was punished with doubled cruelty. After the second attempt, they encased her legs in concrete, not metaphorically, literally. They placed her feet in a bucket and poured in construction mix. When the concrete hardened, she could no longer move. On the 44th day, January 4th, 1989, they beat her for the last time. She could no longer scream. Her body had stopped responding to pain. Her nervous system was destroyed. She died from shock. She was 17 years old. Her body was hidden in a cement drum, filled with concrete, dumped at a landfill. Police found her several months later. One of the kidnappers let it slip during an interrogation about another case. The forensic examiner who conducted the autopsy later gave an interview. He said, "In 20 years of work, I have never seen anything like it. The body was so damaged that identification by appearance was impossible, only by dental records." The most terrifying thing about this story is the sentence. The main defendant received 20 years. The others received from 5 to 10. One of them was released after 8 years and was arrested again for assault. The Japanese judicial system decided that they were minors at the time of the crime and therefore deserved leniency. 125 points, 44 days of continuous pain, full consciousness for the greater part of that period, the complete absence of any medical care, and the understanding, absolute crystal clear understanding, that help was not coming. But this is 125, not 150. Because the most terrifying thing is not what one person does to another. The most terrifying thing is what the body does to itself, when disease turns one's own organism into a torture chamber. When there is no kidnapper to hate. When the enemy is yourself. But about that, in a moment. Because first it is necessary to explain why our brain perceives certain types of pain as absolute. Why certain diseases cause suffering that cannot be suppressed by morphine, or fentanyl, or even a medically induced coma. The answer lies in the structure of the nervous system, and this answer is frightening. The human body contains approximately 7 trillion nerve endings. Most of them are nociceptors, pain receptors. They are located in the skin, muscles, joints, and internal organs. When tissue is damaged, nociceptors send an electrical signal along nerve fibers to the spinal cord, and from there to the brain. The brain interprets the signal as pain. This is a normal process. It protects us. But there exists a condition in which nociceptors begin sending signals without cause, without tissue damage, without an external stimulus. The nervous system goes haywire and begins generating pain impulses on its own. This is called neuropathic pain, and it does not respond to standard painkillers. Morphine blocks certain receptors in the brain, but neuropathic pain travels along different pathways. It bypasses the blockade. It penetrates through any chemical defense. There exists a disease in which neuropathic pain reaches such intensity that patients call it the most severe pain a human being can experience. Doctors who study pain have given it an unofficial name, the suicide disease, because a significant percentage of patients prefer death to the continuation of their suffering. Its official name is cluster neuralgia of the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve is the largest cranial nerve. It is responsible for facial sensation. When it becomes inflamed or damaged, it generates pain signals of such power that patients describe the sensation as a red-hot nail driven into the eye socket, or as an electrical discharge inside the skull, or as an explosion that happens again and again and again. An attack lasts from 15 seconds to 2 minutes, but the attacks repeat up to 200 times per day. Each attack is the maximum pain the human body is capable of producing. And between attacks, there is no relief. There is only the fear of the next attack, which will come in a few minutes. But even this is not 150 points, because cluster neuralgia, for all its cruelty, does not kill. A person suffers but lives. And at the top of our scale is death, slow, inevitable, and accompanied by pain that does not cease for a single second. 150 points, the maximum of the scale. The disease is called fatal familial insomnia. It is a prion disease. Prions are proteins that have changed their structure and become toxic. They are not alive. They are not viruses or bacteria. They cannot be killed because they were never alive. They are simply incorrectly folded molecules, and they cause other proteins to fold just as incorrectly. A chain reaction, like dominoes. Fatal familial insomnia affects the thalamus, the part of the brain responsible for sleep. Prions turn the thalamic tissue into a sponge. Literally, under a microscope, the brain tissue looks like a sponge full of holes. And when the thalamus is destroyed, the person loses the ability to sleep, completely, forever. The first case was documented in 1986. An Italian doctor, Ignazio Reuter, examined a patient from Venice, a man of 53 years old. His name has not been disclosed. The family insisted on confidentiality. It is only known that he belonged to an ancient Venetian lineage. Reuter discovered that similar cases had been occurring in this family for 200 years. Dozens of family members had died the same death. The disease begins imperceptibly. The first symptom is mild insomnia. The person cannot fall asleep. They take sleeping pills. It does not help. They try meditation, warm milk, white noise, nothing. A week passes, 2, 3. Sleep does not come. By the 4th week, panic attacks begin. The body demands sleep, but the brain cannot provide it. The pulse quickens, blood pressure rises, sweating intensifies. The pupils dilate and remain dilated. The person looks as though they are in a state of constant terror. Because they are. Their brain is stuck in alarm mode and cannot exit it. In the 2nd month, hallucinations begin. First, visual. Shadows in the corners of the room. Figures that are not there. Then auditory. Voices, whispers, names. The brain, deprived of sleep, begins generating dreams while awake. But these are not ordinary dreams. These are nightmares indistinguishable from reality. The patient sees them with open eyes. They exist simultaneously in 2 worlds, the real one and the delirious one. And both worlds cause them suffering. In the 3rd month, the person loses the ability to speak. The facial muscles stop obeying. Involuntary movements begin. Tremors, twitching, convulsions. Weight drops rapidly. The body burns itself from within. Metabolism accelerates to dangerous levels. Body temperature rises to 38 or 39 degrees and does not come down. In the 4th month, complete dementia sets in. The person does not recognize loved ones, does not understand where they are, does not remember their own name. But, and this is the most horrifying part, The pain receptors continue to function. The person feels pain. They feel their body being destroyed. They simply cannot communicate it. They are locked inside their own disintegrating brain, as if in a chamber without doors. Death occurs 6 to 30 months after the first symptoms appear. No medication exists. No treatment exists. Sleeping pills do not work. The thalamus is destroyed. There is simply nowhere to send the signal. Barbiturates put the patient into a state resembling a coma, but it is not sleep. The brain does not rest. It continues to deteriorate. The final weeks of life are a state that doctors describe as living death. The body functions. The heart beats. The lungs breathe. But the person inside is already gone. There is only pain, fear, and endless, impenetrable insomnia. To this day, fewer than 40 families in the world have been identified as carrying the mutant gene. Around 200 people know that they are potential carriers. They can take a genetic test, but most refuse, because knowing that you will die exactly like this is already the beginning of torture. 150 points, the maximum on the scale, because here everything converges. Physical pain, the body is destroyed at the cellular level. Psychological pain, hallucinations, panic, madness, existential pain, full awareness of what is happening in the early stages, and duration, up to 30 months of uninterrupted suffering, without a single second of sleep, without a single second of peace. This is the most terrifying death we found, not because it is the most brutal, but because there is no escape from it. There is no kidnapper you can kill. There is no reactor you can run from. There is no cult you can flee. There is only your own brain slowly turning into a sponge, and you feel it. We have traveled the path from 20 to 150 points, from radiation exposure to prion disease, from a second of blue flash to 30 months without sleep. Every case is real. Every victim is a real person with a name, an age, and a life that was cut short too soon and too cruelly. Now, a question for you. Which of these cases seemed the most terrifying to you? Not the most painful, but specifically the most terrifying. The one that gave you chills. The one you will be thinking about before you fall asleep tonight. Write it in the comments. I am genuinely curious because everyone has their own threshold. Everyone has their own personal maximum on the scale of horror. If you have watched up to this point, you have nerves of steel. Seriously. Most people would have closed this much earlier, but you stayed. Subscribe. Content that requires exactly this kind of endurance comes out here regularly. Hit the bell so you do not miss the next episode. It will be no less harrowing, I promise.